Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? If you can, give me a thumbs up. It's all for him's got a thumbs up. So I'm assuming you guys can hear me. Got Lori, Spooky Molder. All right. Hey, I was gonna do this yesterday, but the I just got overcome by events, so I apologize and I just had a lot of stuff going on. I got back kind of late Sunday, and it was a great conference. Thank you for all the prayers because I think the first group I spoke to, I can't remember if it must have been over 100 people, maybe 150. I was in the smaller room, but then the second one I was speaking with, I think it was somewhere north of 300. But anyways, yeah, the flat earther joke. I got him this time with the flat earther joke. So anyways, I've got the slides up on my website. It just under the tab of conference presentations. I'd like to go through. I'll do those probably next week. I may go through the conspiracy one and just kind of walk through the presentation. I can't do it through YouTube right now because I don't know how to stream and then present that. But once I get I'm supposed to be getting my internet upgraded here pretty soon. Once I can do that, I'll have to subscribe to some kind of a third party platform like StreamYard or Melon app or Zoom again or something. And from there, I'll be able to present the slides and actually like go through my presentation. Let's see. Well, hello to everybody. I won't be able to catch everybody's name already, but I appreciate you guys being here. Um, I wanted to talk obviously about what's going on in the news with Israel. I did a little bit of a live update on Sunday on Telegram, and I'd never done that before on Telegram, so I didn't know how it worked. But apparently, it doesn't save it when you go live. So, for those that got to watch it, you got you got my initial thoughts on it, and I'm going to kind of try and recapture that for this here. Um, And I think if you guys aren't following Amir Sarfati on Telegram, you're really missing out on a lot of the updates that he's able to put out. I think he's probably the most accurate source of information coming out right now with everything. But just so everybody knows, I mean, I was there at the conference and I woke up early Saturday morning to the news that Israel was being attacked. And I guess at first it didn't seem, that much out of the norm. You always hear about rockets coming from Gaza into Israel, or, from the northern parts of Israel. You might have Syria, Hezbollah shooting rockets from Syria. So that part really didn't surprise me. But the more the morning went on, and as the news started to come out about what was going on, it became, I mean, I was just blown away by what was happening, and I was, just really upset. I just remember praying for them, for the Israelis, for their leadership, for what was going on there, and I'm starting to tear up. I was just like, it just to see the barbarity of what was happening with these animals, running Hamas there. And I wanted to do some quotes real quick from Amir Sarfati, and then kind of go through some of the quotes that he has on his Telegram page, and kind of put this into some context going forward. Um, Amir Sarfati he says, "First we shall bury our dead, then we will deal with Gaza, and then we will deal with Iran." And that was it. And I just thought, man, okay, this is going to be significant. Whatever this ends up becoming, it's going to be significant. And then once, he early on, he was saying that I think the death toll initially was saying somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 people, 200 to 400 people. But Amir was the first guy that I read that was saying it was going to be north of, around 1,000 Israelis killed, and, you know, maybe double that wounded. and then you have all those Israelis that were kidnapped, the men, women, children, the elderly that were, tortured, paraded around through the streets in Gaza there. It just was absolutely horrific. And I mean, I didn't know that I would be impacted that way. It just impacted me in a very significant way. And I'm sure for the Jewish people that are there that have family members that either are dead or don't know where they are, this is an absolutely terrible time. So, you know, if I can echo what my other brothers and watchmen have said, from Andy Woods to Amir to Tyler to Chooch and others, that's Tom, that everybody that's going on talking about this issue right now. We need to keep praying for the people there. We need to pray that pray for the leadership, that they have wisdom in what they're doing, and the decisions they're making and the targets they're going to choose and how they're going to carry out this, because they have a very limited window of time, and I think they recognize that. They have world support right now, but they know that the longer this drags on, they're going to start losing that support very quickly. And I think this is going to be the impetus for them to carry out these actions inside of Gaza in a very short period of time. And I want to read some quotes from some of their military leadership that I found kind of profound. Um, but in the other sections of the news, this is something that's troubling to me too. You have conservative news pundits and commentators that I've listened to over the years that I've generally liked and agreed with on most things, have somehow come out against Israel, like this wasn't unprovoked. This was a provoked action, that the Hamas in some way were justified in carrying out this barbaric attack. And I immediately just it infuriated me to think that these guys and gals that I used to agree with on a lot of different social topics and things like that are now flipping sides on Israel. And I mean, right now I'm giving those guys the boot. They're persona non grata to me anymore. I don't listen to them, and I won't support them in any form or fashion. But there is no justification for what Hamas has done. None. Um, that they're no different than ISIS. They're no different from the Taliban. They're no different from um, the Nazis. In my opinion, they should all be eradicated, and I wholeheartedly agree with Amir on this sentimentality that these should be wiped off the face of the earth. Period. Um, Now we know that Romans chapter 1 and Romans chapter 11, or excuse me, Romans chapter 13, makes reference to first the society that's given over to a debased mind. They're just fit for destruction. And then Romans 13 talks about the role of government and all this. And governments are meant to be a force of good. So in this barbaric attack against the men and women and children, toddlers, the elderly, um, just the horrific things that they've done warrants their absolute eradication. And so I want to read some quotes from different folks and let you know that this sentimentality is not unique to me necessarily, but I think this attack very much will backfire on Hamas in a way that the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, or the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, backfired on them. It has unified a very divided nation in a way that hasn't happened in since Yom Kippur 50 years ago. So let me read some quotes here real quick. This is from Defense Minister Gallant, and while he was visiting the Southern Command, and I pulled this off of Amir's Telegram page. He's got so many posts now. I don't know if you could go back and find it, but he says, "Quote: We are in war for existence in the region. If we do not collect the full price, deterrence will be lost, and our enemies around us will endanger our existence. We will not be able to prevent every event and hit every terrorist, but we will exact a price that they did not expect, and we will restore deterrence. And that's why there will be steps here that have never been seen before. We will eradicate this threat no matter the cost. Gaza under complete siege. I ordered the IDF not to allow the entry of fuel, food, or water, and there will be no electricity soon. It will take many weeks, if not more than that, but it will end in the victory of the state of Israel. Again, that's from the defense minister Gallant, his statement, and I 100% agree with him. Um, but here's something that he said that stuck out to me. At the beginning, he says, if we do not collect the full price, deterrence will be lost and our enemies around us will endanger our existence. Think back to 9/11, right? 9/11 happened, and within 30 days, we had the Patriot Act. And then within that time period, we had launched attacks into Afghanistan to try and kill Osama bin Laden. And one of the things that's always bothered me about 9/11 was that the majority of these guys that carried out the attacks were Arabs. They're from Saudi Arabia. And why didn't we do anything against Saudi Arabia? I mean, obviously we know why. There was economic reasons, the OPEC, the oil, and so on and so forth. But we did not exact that full price against our enemy, and we spent the next 20 years squandering it on a unwinnable war because we had no desire to eradicate the enemy. When I was there twice, I was there in 2008 and 2013. We knew in the southern part of Afghanistan they had these huge poppy fields that they grow poppy to make heroin, and then they take that heroin and they ship it out around the world to everywhere, and that's what funded the Taliban. I was asking back in 2008, why are we not blow torching these fields, salting them, or eradicating their crops so we take away their money? And we didn't do it then. And I thought, what are we doing here? Why are we wasting our time, our energy, our money, our blood, sweat, and tears, and the lives of young men and women? Why are we wasting them on a fight that we don't intend to win? And I'm so glad to see that this defense minister Gallant recognizes the immediacy of the moment, right? Taking advantage of the moment, and while he has world support, using that to, as much as he can, destroy Hamas and put Hamas back in the pages of history, and they will be a byword that is no longer exists, right? Except for a history book or a Wikipedia page. Right now, according to the foreign reports as of today, it says that the missing and kidnapped in Gaza, they're talking about all those who have been kidnapped, killed, or missing. You have from the United States 9 that are dead. Canada 1 dead, 2 missing. Great Britain, more than 10 dead or missing. France, 1 dead, several missing. Thailand, 12 dead, 11 missing. Nepal, 10 dead. Germany, they don't even know how many. There's a number of unconfirmed missing deaths. Russia, there's 1 dead. Cambodia, 1 dead. China, number of deaths, casualties not confirmed. Brazil has 3 injured. Paraguay has 2 dead and some missing, 2 missing. Ukraine, 2 dead. Mexico, 2 prisoners. Ireland has 1 injured. Tanzania, 2 injured. And when you look at both the news, and if you're following Amir on Telegram, you're seeing he's posting all of the nations around the world right now that are showing unity with the nation of Israel. I think I had them listed here. Let's see. I don't, but there was like Italy, UK, France, Australia, all over the United States, the US White House, different state capitals in the United States. Albania, which has a majority Muslim, is a majority Muslim country. So there is worldwide support right now and sympathy for Israel, the nation of Israel, given the barbarity of what's gone on. But there again, that defense minister recognizes that goodwill and that unity right now is short lived, and I think they're smart to do this as fast as possible because they know the narrative is going to be flipped at some point, and they're going to be facing increasing odds, where the world begins to turn against them. And we know the world's going to turn against him because who is the God of this world? The prince of the power of the air. We know that it's Satan because the Bible tells us that. Now, on Saturday, I'm going to be kind of jumping to a couple of different things that are sticking out to me that I want to. I don't know that anybody else has necessarily addressed, but I've seen it. On Saturday, the Taliban announced a willingness to join the fight against Israel if Iran, Iraq, and Syria would give them safe passage through their country so their fighters could transit through there to go and fight Israel. Also, on the same day, Afghanistan in the western province, which is the city of Herat that's closest to the Iranian border, they were hit with double earthquakes. There was a 6.3 and a 5.9, and it killed nearly 2,000 or somewhere around 2,000, and it's trapped hundreds. So we know the death toll is probably going to go up from there. And this is very reminiscent to me of Bill Koenig's book Eye to Eye. If you go to the website watch.org, Bill Koenig was a correspondent for more than 2 decades already now, but represents a Christian perspective and even better, a prophetic perspective. And he began to tie the natural disasters that we've been seeing since the 90s with how nations are treating Israel. And so when we try to force these peace deals upon Israel, bad things start to happen to us. So there is a cause and effect here from a divine perspective that is um, pretty accurate so far. And on the way out of the conference, I didn't know Bill prior to this. I knew who he was and I'd seen him around and stuff. But I was pulling out, got loaded up, and I was pulling out, and he was getting in his car, and I said, "Hey, Bill," and then I said, "Hey, I'm Pete," and we shook hands and everything, and I kind of brought this up to him, and I just thought it just reminded, just telling him it reminded me of the book Eye to Eye. So I'll put the link in the show notes too as well. You guys can go check that out. But he's done a pretty good job for the last 30 years of chronicling all of these events that have happened. Most notably, when the United States under Bush was really cheerleading this peace deal with um, the Palestinians in 2005, when they pulled the Jews out of those settlements down there, and the Palestinians took over and they basically destroyed all their crops, burned everything down, just act like a bunch of wild animals. And then within a year or two, Hamas had won the election, and they've been ruling there for the last 16 years or so. But when we forced that deal upon Israel to carry out that deal, we got hit with Hurricane Katrina, and it's just like almost to the day, And so those are the kind of things that Bill Koenig's been connecting those ties with. But the fact that the Taliban came out in public, made these statements to their press and to the media, we want to join the fight, and then that same day they get hit with double earthquakes. I can't help but think that's not a coincidence to me. That is a God putting his thumb back on them and saying, you're going to sit here and wait until the time is right, and I'm going to cause this to happen. Now, I do think the Taliban and a lot of these other groups that are east of Iran will join up in this Gog Magog coalition, but their time is not yet. Their God is pushing them to wait and allowing events to happen to wait, to force them to wait until the time is right. Now, I wanted to read from two different passages in Scripture that are still there. They've never been done away with. They've never been nullified. They're still in effect. The first is Genesis 12, when verses 1 through 3, and it says, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed." That is still in effect. That has not changed. That has never been rescinded. The second passage is from Zechariah 2:8. "For thus says the Lord of hosts, he sent me after glory to the nations which plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye, of God's eye. Now, God has still got a plan for Israel. We see that in Romans chapter 11. He is not done with them. There is a time right now of partial blindness that's happening, that will play out until at least the midpoint of the tribulation, when God will begin to open their eyes and they will see the the desperate need that they have for their Messiah, and they finally recognize that Jesus was the Christ, who came. And but more on that in a minute. Um, we know that the U.S. right now under Biden is pre-positioning military assets uh, in the region to be able to react to what's happening there. Should the war get any wider, and it does seem like it's going to. The more that Israel pushes into Gaza in the ground forces, they blew up a mosque that Hamas was using as a kind of a command center. And the world's showing the mosque all blown up, but that's going to infuriate those in Hezbollah. And as this begins to, when they begin to eradicate Hamas, I think Israel or Iran is going to allow these other groups, these proxy groups that they've been funding and training for years, to go ahead and begin to unleash their attacks on them. And this is, I think, my opinion, this is the opening of Psalm 83. Okay, uh, we have the Gerald Ford, USS Gerald Ford, making its way to the territorial waters. It can carry up to 75 combat aircraft. Plus, it has B-52s. There's Tomahawk missiles. There's all sorts of capabilities that these carrier groups are going to present to try and prevent Lebanon, or more importantly, Hezbollah, from getting involved. But I think Hezbollah is going to get dragged into this regardless. And the thing too is that nobody's really scared of President Biden. That they are not scared by any stretch of the imagination. So they know that he's corrupt, weak, spineless, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that his administration are a bunch of amateurs up there. So I don't think that this is going to stop them from reacting. You've got Russia blaming the United States' failed Mideast policies on this. You've got other nations beginning to turn against the United States in terms of allowing this to happen, like allowing Biden to freeze or free up the $6 billion that is now accessible to Iran, who presumably now is funding this war against Israel. Um, so all that to say this, though, the U.S. is supporting Israel to whatever degree. Um, that means that this conflict right now is not the Ezekiel 38, 39 Gog Magog war. It's not that, because when that coalition comes together, nobody will come to Israel's aid. Nobody is going to come to Israel's aid. So that tells me that the United States is not even a factor at this point. I mean, think about it this way. We've got the most corrupt president in history, even more corrupt than Obama, the most corrupt president in history, um, still coming to the aid of Israel. But at this future time, at this Gog and Magog war, nobody comes to her aid. So something happens to the United States that removes us from being a force or a power or whatever in that time. And to me, that is the rapture of the church. The rapture is what decimates the United States. It cripples us in terms of our economy and our governance and all that kind of stuff. And even if it's temporarily, the U.S. may get wrapped up in some, the 10 king beast kingdom confederacy, whatever it's going to be, some kind of regional, global. It's going to be a global government, but it's going to be broken up into regions. The U.S. could get wrapped up into something like that, but it won't be called the United States anymore. It'll be called something else. It won't have a constitution or anything like that. It won't look like it does today, but I think that will may be the case. But the rapture will collapse the United States as we know it right now. Um, so looking at Gog and Magog, knowing that this is still something on the horizon, if this is Psalm 83, and I'm going to use the big capital letter if this is Psalm 83, what we're seeing unfold, we should begin to see other groups begin to join in the fray, trying to get in this fight. Now, the last major thing that's happened to Israel in terms of something to this scale was 50 years ago with Yom Kippur in 1973. Prior to that, it was the Six Day War in '67. So this make no bones about it. This conflict right now, this war, is unprecedented in terms of scale, size, numbers of death, who the target was. In '73, it was army against army. Here, it's been terrorist groups against civilians largely. And now the army is getting involved, the air forces are getting involved, their navy is getting involved, their intelligence agencies are getting involved, and they are going to put the full weight of their military might against eradicating this group. So let me read this here too real quick. This is a couple of different things I want to bring into the perspective. Um, and Anita, I got the questions on there, so thank you on the Telegram chat. Let's see here. I had a quote from Senator Marco Rubio, of all people, and I wanted to read that. If I can find it. Let's see. Well, I thought I saved it. Anyways, Marco Rubio is basically saying the same thing, to the point that um, that we should eradicate this group from the face of the planet. Um, and I don't really know a lot about Marco Rubio. I'm not a fan of his. I'm not a critic either. I don't really know that much about him in terms of where he stands on every issue. Oh, here it is. But I do like this quote from him, or this tweet. He says, "There will be no ceasefire. There can be no ceasefire, negotiated solution, or peaceful coexistence with depraved barbarians who murder teenage girls, children, and the elderly, and then dump them in the streets of Gaza so bloodthirsty crowds can desecrate their bodies. Hamas must be eradicated, and Israel must respond disproportionately to this and to any future attacks from any enemy. And we are working on the eradication part." So I just thought that was cool that he said that. I 100% agree with him. Israel should react disproportionately to what has happened. Um, by that I mean, if there ends up being 1,000 dead Israelis from these attacks, um, Israel should hit them back 100-fold and really eradicate their entire military capabilities, neuter them altogether. And I know that sounds harsh. It does. It is harsh, and I want to get to a lot of the spiritual components here in a little bit. But you cannot allow, uh, we can't allow this type of behavior from humans without responding disproportionately. The same thing happened in World War II. You know, that was the last major conflict that we won in what we would call total war, where it was absolute utter surrender was the only option on the table, and you had to break that country down to the point that they absolutely gave up. We did that to Germany. We did that to Japan. We went afterwards and began executing all the Nazis for all the things that they did. You know, those involved with the Holocaust and the concentration camps. That was the right thing to do, because you can't allow that to continue. Even the idea of those things is absolutely dangerous, and we start to see the Nazi sympathizers and racist groups that began to pick up on these things, and they just spread this. It's like a poison that spreads to other generations. So they should absolutely be eradicated. Now, as I mentioned before, this is not Gog and Magog, but I think this is beginning to set the stage from that. If if this is Psalm 83, then according, and I'm going to quote here Bill Salas, who's identified the different groups that are mentioned in this. Um, you have the tents of Edom, which is the Palestinians and the South Jordanians, the Ishmaelites, who are the Saudis, Moab, which is the Palestinians and the Central Jordanians, the Hagarites, who are the Egyptians, Gebal, which is Hezbollah and North Lebanese, Ammon, which is Palestinians and North Jordanians, Amalek, the Arabs of the Sinai area, Philistia, which is going to be Hamas, Tyre, who is Hezbollah in the South Lebanese, and Assyria, which is Syria and North Iraqis. These are the co-conspirators in Psalm 83. And so here's something that I think that one of the things I think that gets lost in the sauce here. Um, this idea that there is such a thing as a Palestinian is a historical farce, and it is absolutely, when somebody, I don't even like to use that term because it is nonsensical. It's like saying that a European is a ethnicity, or Africans are ethnicity, to some degree, that it's so broad it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't define anything. A European can be anybody from Greece or Spain all the way up to the Nordic countries. It can look completely different cultures. I mean, it's so broad. The same thing with Africans. You have Africans in the, if we're going to call them, just like name them by the continent, you have light-skinned Arab ethnic Africans that live in the North Africa, all the way down to sub-Saharan African, where people look very different cultures, different languages, different everything, all the way down to even to the white Africans who were there, due to colonization over the past 300 or 400 years. It's like saying Americans is an ethnicity. Americans is not an ethnicity. We are a culture, and we're a country, but we're not an ethnicity. And that's this broad term of Palestinians I want to really attack today, because if you know history, and you don't take my word for it, just go to Google, look up newspaper headings about Mideast wars in Jerusalem or in the area, what they called Palestine then, and look at clashes between who was fighting who. In every instance before 1964, everybody was called either an Arab or a Jew. And then when you have a lot of earlier newspapers from the 19 teens and the 20s, I can't remember the name of the newspaper, but if you were a Jew living in Palestine at the time, you were a Palestinian Jew. If you were an Arab living in Palestine at that time, you were a Palestinian Arab. There was no such thing as a Palestinian in and of itself. There's no unique ethnic difference for a Palestinian. That doesn't exist. It's simply the people that live in that area. There's nothing that makes somebody Texan ethnically. Like, I'm a Texan, but I'm not a Texan. There's nothing unique about a Texan from an ethnic standpoint, right? Nothing genetic, nothing in my DNA, or how tall I am, or what my hair looks like, or whatever. We are definitely a distinct culture for sure, but we're not our own separate ethnicity because we live in Texas. Even if you've got 10 generations living in Texas, you're not a different ethnicity. You're a Texan by culture and by birth. That's where you live, but that doesn't make you one ethnically. It's not a specific ethnicity, if that makes sense. Same could be said for Californians, Kansans, Ohioans, Floridans, Canadians, Brazilians, et cetera, right? There, this You had Palestinian Arabs and you had Palestinian Jews, and they were called that because that area was called Palestine, and it had been called Palestine for about 2,000 years. But think about it this way: prior to 1918, going all the way back to the 1500s, the early 1500s, that whole area was the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks controlled that entire East area there. So there was never a country called Palestine in and of itself. In fact, that whole area has been conquered and dominated by so many different groups, going back to the time of when the Jews were there originally, there from the 70 AD and before. It's always been conquered by other people. It's never been controlled by one one ethnic group that controlled it, right? The name Palestine came from the Emperor Hadrian, who in around 129 or 130 AD um, wanted to de-Judaize the entire area. He was tired of all the revolts there. He wanted to get rid of the Jewish people. He wanted to get rid of their culture. And what did he do? He renamed the area from the land of Israel. He called it Palestina or Syria Palestina after the Jews' ancient enemies, the Philistines. He even renamed Jerusalem, I can't even say the name, Aelia Capitolina, and he created this Roman fort around it and began to secularize it. He wouldn't even let Jews come into the city anymore. The only day that they could come in one day a year, and that was on Tish B'Av, just to fast. And that was it. And the rest of the time, it became a very secular city. And that name Aelia Capitolina was used up into the 7th century. And when the Muslims became a force around the 6th and 7th century, and they conquered that area, you had all these different the Umayyad dynasty. I mean, there was all these different Muslim groups that took over. They would conquer each other, and then they would claim control over that area. And so it wasn't until the Ottomans in the 15th century that they finally controlled the area for more than just a few generations. All these Muslim groups kept fighting amongst themselves, and so they would just conquer each other. Then you had the Crusaders that came in and dominated that area for about 100, almost 200 years. So there's no such thing as a Palestinian. They don't have their own distinct culture, their own distinct language, their own distinct anything. They're Arabs, and they're a mixture of Arabs. They're not even just from Saudi Arabia. You've got guys that came in from the Jordanian areas. You've got people from Egypt. You got people from Syria and other parts. So all of these groups that are mentioned here are all kind of blended together now under this kind of generic term Palestinian. Yasser Arafat was Egyptian. He wasn't even from there. He was born in Egypt. So uh, if you want to call it that, right? If we're gonna play the game where we call somebody their ethnicity by where they were born, then Yasser Arafat is Egyptian, and he was the head of the PLO, right? And so the Palestinian Liberation Organization was created in '64 and really came under the tutelage from the Soviet Union because the Arabs could not beat the Jews militarily. So the Soviets came in and began to say, "Hey, if you're going to fight these guys, you have to win the narrative. You have to win popular sentiment, and you have to make it look like this is a completely unfair, lopsided fight where the Jews are the oppressors and you are the victims. You're the indigenous people, you're the victims, so on and so forth." And that's the same lie that they've been spouting ever since, right? And in 1977, you had Menachem Begin, Anwar Sadat, who or Menachem Begin was the prime minister of Israel. You had Anwar Sadat, who was the prime minister of Egypt, and you had Jimmy Carter. They came up with this ridiculous plan called the Camp David Accords, and this was going to be land for peace, right? And they did this for 40 years, and it never worked, right? It was just one intifada after the other, one terrorist attack after the other. I mean, it was just there was no peace, no matter what the Israelis did. And so the whole land for peace thing, think about 40. When you look at the number 40 in the Bible, it always represents a time of testing or judgment. It rained 40 days and 40 nights in Noah's flood. The Israelites were in the desert for 40 years. Jesus went into the desert for 40 days, and so on and so forth. There's other examples, but the 40 seems like this 40 years had to play out. And we're looking at this in hindsight, and we know that it basically it began in 77 and it ended basically for all intents and purposes in 2017 when Trump announced that Jerusalem was the eternal capital of Israel. And when he made that announcement as the most powerful nation in the world, that argument that they had been spouting for 40 years was all thrown out the window. And then we moved our embassy there and opened it there on May 15th or 14th, somewhere around there, in 2018, which was again 70 years from 1948 when Israel declared their independence. So there's a lot of significance to the things that have been happening, at least from a biblical standpoint and from a numerical, or what's the term I'm looking for when we use numbers in the Bible, numerology or whatever. When you see the same number used in a similar way over and over and over, like the number seven or the number three or the number six, etc., these are used in um, uh, repeatedly throughout Scripture. Like the number seven is used 52 times in the Book of Revelation, and when you add five plus two, what do you get? You get seven, right? So it's these things are not coincidence, right? It's not coincidence that Trump announced uh, or reopened the embassy in Jerusalem, 70 years from the date that they declared their independence. Neither is it coincidence that the Hamas here attacked 50 years to the day from the Yom Kippur War. So, if we knew a little bit about history, and if these other pundits out there that are trying to equivocate and justify what Hamas did, if they understood history even a little bit, a true history, not this rewritten alternative history that they've been brainwashed by. If they understood how history actually played out, they would see these things as intentional. This was not some kind of provoked thing. This was planned, funded, um, trained, all of that by nefarious forces, the Iranian leadership. You've got probably many within the Saudi leadership, at least the religious leadership, those that will fund these kind of things, um, and other groups, in Jordan and in Syria and other places. So it is not. It does seem like these groups can all fit within the Psalm 83 folks can fit within just the tent of Hamas in and of itself, because it's a broad tent and it has a lot of different people in there. They're not a unique ethnicity. They're a amalgamation of different groups that have come there over time. And then if Hezbollah joins in, then you're going to see them. Um, this could be the Israel again saying that the response, if Hezbollah gets involved, will be the destruction of Damascus. So that could be Isaiah 17 playing out. So we're seeing things unfold now in a way that is surprising most most of us. I've been at that conference this weekend. I think most of us were kind of caught by surprise. You had tour groups over there. Andy Wood's ministry, they had a cruise over there to. They were supposed to go to Israel on Saturday, and then all got changed when everything kind of the news broke and all that. So I think it caught a lot of people by surprise. And thankfully, Bill Salas was there, Bill Koenig was there, and some other folks that have really their expertise is in this. I could sit there and listen to. And I posted one of the videos on my Telegram, so you can go back and watch that. It's also on YouTube as well. Prophecy Watchers posted that. Um, so here's my prophetic outline, and then we'll go to the Q&A portion of it. Um, I believe that we know that our enemy is not the Gazan people. We know that our enemy is not the Iranian people. Our enemy, from a Christian perspective, is not even Hamas necessarily, or ISIS, or the Taliban, or the Third Reich, or the Soviets, or the Russians, or the Ukrainians, or whoever. We know that our enemy is Satan, and that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against these spiritual forces of darkness that influence and deceive and run these humans like puppets on strings. They're marionettes, right? They run these groups, and they've got them so deceived into thinking that what they're doing is right, that it blinds them to the truth. And so that is who the real enemy is. And so why has Israel been under such tumult for the last, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years? I mean, we could even really go back to 2016, when the United States was under Barack Obama, was funding groups to get oust Netanyahu out of office. I mean, the U.S. gave these progressive leftist groups like almost $500,000 to defeat Netanyahu. He ended up winning, but look at what's followed. after all the, just crazy riots, the protests, these leftist groups have ramped up. So George Soros, the Democrat left, progressives, so on and so forth, anti-Semite groups are funding these leftist organizations within Israel to cause chaos and disrupt their democracy there. And the reason I think that we are seeing that is once Trump announced Israel or Jerusalem being the eternal capital of Israel, and once we moved our embassy there, it began to, I think, from a satanic and demonic perspective, began to shift the narrative that a third temple was on its way. That was the opening salvo from the order of events that are happening, and he's beginning to try and prevent that. So he has been stirring up Israel's enemies from both within and without. And so that's why we've seen the last 10 months, we've seen Israel as divided as they've been over these judicial reforms. And these groups are just protesting, rioting, and what it did to Israel's external enemies is it presented them as weak and divided and as an easy target. If they were going to hit them, this was like the perfect time. And oh, just by the way, it happens to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Yom Kippur, right? Imagine that. So Satan has stirred up their enemies to prevent Israel from, I believe, making any further progress on building a third temple. And why does Satan not want this third temple to be built? Because he knows he knows how this is going to play out. He knows how this is going to end. He knows that at that moment there's a clock that's going to start ticking, and he's got, the very little time to carry out his plan before Christ returns at the second coming, cast him into the abyss, and then establish his kingdom on the earth. Like, he is trying to drag this out as long as he can. And I think that's why he's been stirring up all of this chaos and tumult in Israel and around Israel, like he has been. But I think what's going to come out of all this, though, is, as Amir Sarfati mentioned, and I'm going to read a quote from him too. He said, "It's unthinkable the number of 1,500 terrorists were killed inside Israel thus far. That means that at least 2,000 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists had infiltrated Israel on Saturday. These Nazi-like, bloodthirsty Jewish-hating monsters may have killed 1,200 Israelis, but they actually brought back to life the spirit and resilience of our nation. The inner division of the last 10 months has been replaced with unity." Now, you look at where they are in the government, they are all unified, left, right, center, everybody, in destroying Hamas. And that's it. I guess it took something like this in order for the nation to become united, much in the same way that the United States was united, right after 9/11. There, this is that short window of time that I believe they're going to capitalize on in wiping out their enemies in the Gaza Strip and possibly to the north, depending on how much Hezbollah gets involved. Continuing his quote, "If any one of our enemies banked on the liberal left soldiers not getting to their reserve units, they were wrong. 100% of reserve soldiers and pilots reported back to their units. An unprecedented number of 400,000 reserve soldiers showed up and are getting ready at this moment to begin the real fight. Make no mistake, what you've seen so far in Gaza is not even the beginning." So, wow. Uh, yeah, I don't want to diminish what's happening here at all. I think that this very much looks, smells, sounds like Psalm 83. And if you take that in conjunction with all of the other converging signs around the world, technology, digital currency, the US beginning to collapse, and so on and so forth, it just seems like the timing is right for it. So I think Satan is sensing the nearness of the third temple. I think he's stirring up Israel's enemies, both inside the borders and outside, to prevent Israel from doing this. But out of this, I think, is going to come, through whatever means, this construction of the third temple, or at least the agreement to do it, right? They may lay the cornerstone. I don't know how much of it they will get built in there, but I do believe that this will be the beginning of it. Because remember, for 40 years they tried this land for peace deal, and every time they just got stabbed in the back. And finally, Netanyahu was like, "This is not working. We have to do something different." The Abraham Accords was something different in the terms of not trying to reach this utopian level of peace in the Middle East, which was never going to happen. But what it did provide was a sense of normalization between Israel and her Arab neighbors that never existed before. So between that, the this conflict right now, which I don't know how much this will impact the Abraham Accords, but I think even nations like the UAE, United Arab Emirates, were condemning Hamas for what they did. Like they were like, dude, that was too far. That was too far. So surprising. Albania, again, 60% Muslim, Sunni Muslim, in solidarity with Israel. And I'm sure that the UAE is not the only ones. I don't know if other nations have come out, but we all have families. We all have wives and or husbands or sons and daughters and grandchildren and elderly relatives. To see what these Hamas animals did, the barbarity of it, there is no excuse. And I think even other Muslim leadership in other Muslim nations are like, man, they're putting a lot of sunshine between them and what the Hamas has done. Other nations that normally have funded the Palestinians, Austria, Germany, have immediately cut funding to them. I imagine that they won't be the only ones. Other nations will join in and cut their funding. So I think this is the end of Hamas, period. What happens to the Gaza Strip after this, I don't know. But it definitely will not, this event will never happen again from that particular group and from that particular area. We know in the tribulation, though, much worse things are going to happen. Zechariah, I want to say chapter 13, mentions that 2/3 of the people in the land of Israel are going to be cut off, going to be killed, women ravished, and so on and so forth, and that only 1/3 are going to come through it and be saved. But I think right now Israel has somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 million people in terms of citizens. You take 2/3 of that away, 1/3 will come through that tribulation time period and be saved. That's not something we want to happen. That's just something that God said is going to happen because of the Antichrist, the one world kingdom, and in the one world government, etc. So the second thing is in my kind of outline here is the impetus for Gog Magog, right? So um, there's some, I don't know how to say this without rambling off into a thousand different directions, but you know the U.S. provoked Russia basically into attacking Ukraine. That is without even question what happened. First of all, NATO was created to prevent the expansion of the Soviet Union, their influence, military, etc. Um, and once the Soviet Union collapsed in '92, or the December '91 and in the spring of '92, really NATO didn't need to exist anymore. It could have been transformed into something else, but it stayed NATO, and it even began to expand. And so there was that, right? And that set the tone for when Putin came to power in 2000. Um, you begin to see the U.S. begin to interfere in what used to be Soviet satellite nations, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, um, Georgia, so on and so forth, and in Ukraine. And particularly under Obama, Victoria Nuland, who was like the deputy secretary of whatever under Obama, she was played a big hand in destabilizing Ukraine and putting all these really radical progressive left leaders in there that were vehemently anti-Russian, which caused obviously consternation from Russia to begin to counteract because that's their neighbor. They share a border with them. They don't need them to be some outpost for the CIA. And the CIA was doing crazy stuff there. They had chemical labs and all kinds of junk in there. So there was a lot of shady stuff going on in Ukraine that ultimately Putin felt like he had to attack to neutralize that threat. And I'm not justifying what he's done. I think it's a tragedy all around. I'm just saying that the U.S., from a geopolitical standpoint, provoked that conflict, and we prevented peace from happening. We've even gone in there when they almost could go back to a peace agreement between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and we sabotaged it. And so um, that conflict is going to go on. But what it did is it soured a lot of the world, at least in the Western Hemisphere, against Russia, right? And so now Russia has had to turn to China, another East Asian powerhouse, for their support. And in that, you have also the grouping of BRICS, the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the ones they've just added. The Saudis, I think, who we pushed away from our sphere of influence into the arms of this other coalition that is now creating this kind of polar opposite world order. And so we know that from Russia and China's perspective, they want to create a Eurasian world order. And then from the United States, United Nations, the World Economic Forum, that side, we want to create kind of a Western led world order where the West leads. Well, ultimately, I think that this is going to culminate in some kind of conflict, presumably under the red horse, the rider on the red horse. Once, and this is after the rapture and all that. So the judgments have already begun, the seal judgments. But I think that that actually plays out, and the West will win that conflict, subdue them for a time, until later on at the end of Revelation that you see the kings of the East begin to rise back up and march against the Antichrist and his forces that are headquartered in Jerusalem. But this is why I said this is I could rabbit trail into a lot of different things here. But the war in Ukraine, even though Israel wasn't openly supporting it, they were allowing the U.S. to pull weapons and munitions and stuff where we had placed them in Israel, and those got shipped to Ukraine to fight against the Russians. So obviously there is some bad blood there. There is also the Nord Stream pipeline, which was destroyed by the United States, and I think Sweden or Finland, one of those groups, went in there and took it out, which now sabotaged the EU's cheap natural gas that they had been getting from Russia. Now that natural gas has got to come from somewhere else. The U.S. can sell it to them because we have plenty of reserves to sell them in terms of natural gas. However, it's much more expensive for them to buy it from us. And that leaves the other alternative, which is Israel. We know that Israel, for the last 15 or 20 years or so, they've had these massive natural gas reserves off their coast. They began to drill. They've got the platforms. They're building the pipeline. It's called the East Med pipeline, and they've already worked out deals with Cyprus and Greece to run that pipeline up through there into Europe. So there was an article that I had. It was back in 2020 that they that it was originally written. So this was August of 2020, and it says the title of it says Russia, but it's Putin putting Russia in its place. Israel's pipeline will foil Moscow. Um, and so this deal has been ongoing for a long time. I think ultimately this may be part of what that the Antichrist deal is, that allows them to ship this massive amounts of natural gas into southern Europe, and then that gets distributed throughout the rest of Europe, as well as to Egypt and some other places in the Mediterranean. But it angers Russia because now that was a huge source of income that they had coming in. So it also angers Turkey because Turkey is cut out of the deal, right? Turkey's not allowed to; they're not part of this, even though these pipelines, it doesn't go through their territorial waters. There's a lot of consternation for um, there's a lot of consternation for these viewers for them, or these people that would have received them now are being cut out. Turkey, and then obviously, I think even out of this conflict, there is going to be um, an attack on Iran, whether it's a strategic attack against their nuclear capabilities, or it is a attack against their nuclear capabilities on top of a lot of their military assets they may have positioned around their country. So I think that that's coming. So That is what I think solidifies the hook in the jaw, if you will, for Russia and this coalition to come against Israel. But obviously, I think that Gog Magog is a little bit down the road from now. I think that happens after the rapture, because as we showed there, the U.S. will not support. There's nobody that comes to Israel's aid during Gog Magog. So again, looking back at the most corrupt presidential administration and government right now, that the U.S. has ever had, is still sending military support and aid to Israel. The fact that we don't send any at some future point in Gog Magog leads me to believe that the U.S., at least the government, the structure, etc., is non-existent. There's not. We are we are in a disarray of chaos or whatever at some point due to what I believe to be that next great crisis, and that's going to be the rapture of the church. Okay, so I'll have time to take a few questions from folks. I've gone for about an hour. Let's see here. Thank you, Anita, for collecting all these. Do you think we're next? From Kate Crosswhite. You know what? It wouldn't surprise me that we've had these open borders in the South that have allowed OTMs and, other than Mexicans, come across in vast numbers. We don't even know who's all in the country right now. So that could certainly contribute to um, the activation. Like, let's say the U.S. gets involved. Let's say Hezbollah, escalates things. Israel escalates things. The U.S. begins to bomb parts of Syria, etc. Iran could activate sleeper cells within the United States that came over through the southern border. That I could see that happening very easily. Um, to what extent, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it would be another 9/11, but it could be. It could be some kind of catastrophic event. Isn't it possible that Psalm 83 participants are already all secretly involved in this attack? Absolutely. From John Bellum. Yep, I totally agree. Again, when you look at all the different ethnicities in that group, I think they're already all in Gaza right now. I mean, there's just an amalgamation of different people there, um, that, it's asinine to think again that Palestinian is its own unique ethnicity. It's not. It's just a generic label that was thrown and created out of thin air back in the 1960s by the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Pete, will you explain the Psalm 83 prophecy? Well, I mean, there's kind of two different points of view on it, two major different points of view. Psalm 83 by some is viewed as a imprecatory prayer, where I think it's Asaph or whoever wrote Psalm 83 is wishing the destruction of his enemies. Then you have the other perspective, Bill Salas and others, that believe that it's a future war that has not yet happened, but will happen. And so the closest thing that we had to this in history was Yom Kippur. Israel's still there. Her enemies are still there. I think this is really just kind of the conclusion for Yom Kippur, and I think it does. It seems like it manifests all of the right material characters, motives, etc., to fulfill Psalm 83. Um, Gloria Minix, question: why does it say in Daniel 12 that many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt? It says many, not all. Let me go back and read that here. Let's see. Daniel 12. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Well, I'm of the belief, first of all, that at the rapture is specifically for the church, and that goes back to um, that first century, the first Christian in the first century, to the last person that converts to Christ at the second before the rapture happens, that would constitute the church, right? And over at least 2,000 years now, and we are the dead in Christ, who are like everybody that we've lost, my father and others. They're in heaven right now in their spiritual bodies, which means to say that they are what Paul and Peter does is kind of being naked. They don't have a physical body yet. So when the rapture happens, the dead in Christ rise first, right? Uh, so their bodies, wherever their bodies might be, scattered to the bottom of the ocean, chewed up and spit out by animals. The bones may be rotting away in some 50 feet underground. Wherever they are, their bodies are going to be reconstituted, and their spirits are going to come down, their spirit bodies, and they're going to be brought together into this new glorified immortal body, right? If God is able to I know a lot of Christians have consternation about being cremated, but they shouldn't. God is going to be able to put them all back together again, just like He put them together like the first time, out of cells, the birthing process. And then those who are alive, us Christians, let's say the rapture happened 5 minutes from now, um, then we are translated from mortal to immortal, from natural to supernatural, these glorified bodies in a moment, in an instant. And so we are part of this first resurrection, this part of it. Now, I believe that the Jews, those who died before Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, who would constitute what we'd call the Old Testament saints, were in paradise. So when they died, they went down to paradise, which was the paradise side of Sheol. So Sheol was divided into two compartments: paradise and torments. So the Old Testament wicked, the dead, they went to torments, and the Old Testament righteous went to paradise. Christ came down during his death and witnessed and preached to those. He also preached to the other guys, not to that they can be saved at that point, but to say that he was the fulfillment that the righteous had been waiting for. Kind of not to say rubbing it in their face, but like he was demonstrating that he is the Christ. And then he takes them back with him to heaven, and they are also there in their spiritual bodies, as Paul and Peter allude to as being naked. They're like tents. We're right now we're in tents, and the bodies that we will get in heaven will be buildings made from God. I mean, they're going to be indestructible. We will be indestructible, immortal, forever and ever and ever, right? And that's the bodies that we will be, how God, I guess, intended us to be, without the effects of sin and corruption and all the things that we've been subjected to since the fall of Adam and Eve. Now, I believe that the Old Testament saints, the righteous, are going to be resurrected at the end of the tribulation, at the second coming, right in time for the ushering in of the kingdom. This is the kingdom that they had been promised throughout all of the Old Testament. They had been looking forward to this kingdom age, and I think they're going to be able to go into it um, in these glorified bodies, or whatever their bodies is, in those regards. And then the wicked, Old Testament wicked, are not going to be resurrected again until the great white throne judgment, which they are then given their indestructible bodies, right? And they're going to be cast alive into the lake of fire after their judgments, along with all the wicked from the rest of the ages. So that's how I see that passage playing out. Okay, DC for JC. Question: I heard Pastor Tom and Bill Koenig talking yesterday about the Palestinians, that they were in the war area. Doesn't that mean they believe Palestinians exist? I am confused. I think that the term Palestinian is being used simply because everybody's familiar with it. But if you listen to them on any length on any other topic, they say there's no such thing as a Palestinian, ethnically speaking. There's not some unique ethnic group called the Palestinians. They're simply a name that they've coined and hijacked and taken as their own. Um, just like the term West Bank, there's no biblical basis for the word West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. So we use these terms because everybody's familiar with it, but they're not biblical, and there's no justification for them. But and it's just using that term because it's everybody kind of understands what you're saying without having to go into a 20-minute backstory each time of the history of the land there. David Jack asks, with the influx of military age illegals crossing the border lead to a terrorist attack in the U.S. So when I go back to Genesis 12, right now our government is supporting Israel and funding and providing military aid, and at least military support should it expand to a broader area. Um, but I think the minute that we turn as a nation, our leadership turns from uh, supporting Israel to like condemning Israel. Let's say that this conflict drags on for another 2 months, and I mean, the Israelis are going through street by street and house by house and clearing out everything, and they are completely eradicating every tie to Hamas. And we begin to condemn that. I think that we will start to see the activation of sleeper cells that will start popping up here and there, and it'll be pretty chaotic. So, and then we'll get mired in our own, problems here. So, Tammy asked, could this be the stage for God to prepare the nations around Israel for their positions for the Gog and Magog war? Yeah, I think all of this is. I think at the end of this, Israel is going to expand her borders. She'll be more powerful, I think, at the end of this particular juncture than before, and more unified as a nation. And we'll be sitting in a much stronger position, so much so that in the event that the rapture happens, um, they may be feeling very overconfident in their abilities. But once the U.S. is no longer there to lead any kind of a coalition to support Israel, I think everybody's going to turn their backs on her pretty quickly. Trout on Stories asks, what is your opinion on the Saudi deal that was made, not formally announced, and what is going on in Israel right now? Why was the IDF seemingly missing in action, and how did Mossad not see it coming? I think for the last 10 months, Israel's been very distracted with all of the chaos that's been going on in their own political systems, with the protest, the rioting, and things like that. Um, so I do think that that played a part in distracting Israel. Um, I think that they underestimated Hamas's willingness to do something like this. Um, I think maybe they believed that they were content with just launching rockets here and there, but nothing to this scale. So I think it caught them by surprise. I mean, we could ask the same thing about 9/11. We get how did we let 19 guys from clearly troubled backgrounds and troubled areas that are prone to terrorism go through flight training, and then enter these flights on these crazy visas and phony whatever. Even when the FBI and the CIA knew about them, they had known about them for about a year prior, and had been watching them. So how did we let that happen? Well, the conspiratorial side of me says that there was an agenda behind this. Somebody allowed it to happen on purpose. The normal, flag waving American side of me says, well, you had these different chains of authority, and things just got lost in the mix. And what this agency knew, this other agency didn't know, and they weren't cross talking, they weren't sharing, so they weren't aware of all of the red flags and things going off. And I think that could be also the case with this too. So um, I think when this began, there was a barrage of rockets. I mean, there's a crazy amount of rockets that masqueraded the other breaches through the fences and stuff. So they were, kind of, hey, look at this hand over here, and then we're going to sneak in over here. I think there's a little bit of that. And then, also the monotony, not the monotony, but the predictability, I guess is the better word, that they would only just be launching rockets, and eventually we would launch some rockets back, and this kind of everything would go back to the status quo, not maybe not taking into account the 50th anniversary of Yom Kippur, or the tenacity and willingness of these terrorists to actually do what they did. So yeah, Israel was caught sleeping, asleep at the wheel, and I think the population was caught asleep at the wheel, especially when you have a rave going on in the southern part near the border. I mean, I weep for those people that were there that were attacked. I'm not making light of that. I think there's been a lot of confusion over the last 10, 15 years where the narrative has been kind of flipped on its head to show that the Palestinians are somehow indigenous people that are being oppressed by the Jews. And that's not true at all. They have to put those fences up because of all of the intifadas and the attacks and the terrorism. They had to do something. They had to protect their own citizens. That's what governments do. They protect their citizens. That's what they're supposed to do. So, you know, uh, they had to make it very stringent for these guys, but they also provided, Gaza electricity, oil, water, resources. They allowed these Gazans to come in and work and then go back and take the money back. And so they've been incredibly gracious in what they've allowed them to do, despite all of the attacks and despite all of the rockets and all of the other things that have happened. So, um, I there is no excuse what Hamas did. Period. Now, as far as the Saudi deal goes, I don't know if you're talking about the Camp David Accords, or not the Camp David, the Abraham Accords with the normalization process, and there's also a deal between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and I think India that they're going to do this energy route all the way to Europe through there. Um, if that's the deal you're talking about, obviously Iran wants to throw a monkey wrench into the normalization process between Israel and all of these Arab countries, Sunni Arab nations. Um, and this was, there's a lot of pluses for Iran to do what they did, to back it and to support it and to get Hamas to do their dirty work right now, because they're looking to destabilize all these normalization deals going on between Israel and her neighbors. Of course, they don't want that. They want all of the uh, Islamic world, both Sunni and Shia, everybody united against Israel. And the Abraham Accords threatened to undo all that. So of course it makes sense that they had motive to do this. So, but for me, Mossad, there is no excuse why they didn't know. Mossad is one of the best intelligence, if not the best intelligence agency in the world, and they didn't see this coming. I'm sure there's going to be, after all this is said and done, and militarily they achieve what they set out to achieve, there's going to be a lot of court hearings and investigations as to why this was allowed to happen, both from a military standpoint and from an intelligence standpoint. So, heads may roll down the road, but right now they're singularly focused on recovering, burying their dead, and then bringing actions to Gaza, and then eventually uh, to Iran, um, and possibly even to Hezbollah should they get involved any further than they already have. Sherry asks, if Gaza is razed and Damascus destroyed, would that leave Israel dwelling in tranquility, set up for Ezekiel 38? Um, Honestly, I don't. There's a couple of things in the Gog Magog conflict that I don't understand, and I don't understand it because I'm limited to the information available to us now here in 2023. How does Israel get to the point where they are dwelling in peace and security, unwalled villages? Um, how are they caught by surprise by this massive coalition made up of Russia, Turkey, Iran, plus all these other nations that join in with them? How are they caught by surprise in all this? How are these battles? Are they riding horses? Should we take it that literally, that they're on horses and have these weapons that can be burned, which seems to uh, indicate that they're not necessarily wooden or things that can be burned? Because right now we fight mostly with metal, vehicles and vehicles made out of graphite and Kevlar and really heavy metal to prevent damage from IEDs and bullets and things like that. So in blast, so there's some things inside of the Gog Magog conflict that I don't understand, but that's not the Bible's fault. It's my fault because I'm limited to the information available to me in my time. But at some point, it will happen, in a way that those looking at it from hindsight in the future, when they look back at that conflict from hindsight, they will say, "Oh, that made sense. You know, all of these things happened, and it will make sense at that point." Just like 20, 30 years ago, people didn't understand how the mark of the beast could be implemented in a world that was dominated by cash and fiat currency and gold and stocks and bonds and things. So nowadays, with CBDCs and everything else, we see the way that the global currency is moving. It absolutely is looks very easy. It makes a lot of sense to us. But back then, they were limited to the information available to them at their time. And again, we're limited to the information available to us now, which makes the conflict of Gog and Magog seem very. Um, it seems hard to understand it. We can look at we recognize the nations. We can understand the players, but there are things within that conflict that don't make sense to us because the the dynamics of today. I don't know. It just I personally think that Gog Magog happens after the rapture of the church, and I think that when you look at the focus there when you look at the focus from God's perspective, it's purely on Israel. It seems like the church is not in the picture any longer. So, okay. Faith asks, do you think a scenario like Isaiah 17:1, possibly nuclear, actuated by Israel, could make the world governments turn against Israel? Absolutely. Yep. I could see Hezbollah getting involved uh, officially to some degree, and Israel absolutely wiping out Damascus with that as a deterrence, and that could turn a lot of nations against Israel. That could start the beginning of the nations beginning to turn against Israel. So, okay. Well, hopefully, I think that's all the questions right now. I missed all of the chat because of my ramblings, but I want to thank everybody for coming on. Again, apologies for not being here yesterday. I really intended to, but I could not get it together yesterday. I had just so much things happening and stuff going on here that it just wasn't going to happen. Um, I'm just looking through some of the comments here. Okay. Again, excuse my nose is itching. I have my slides up from the conference is up on my website. If you want to go through them, I know some people have asked me one of the video or one of the presentations I did back in May of 22, I think, which was in Colorado, had an embedded video. Um, I wasn't able to when I convert it to a PDF. I'm not able to convert that to get that video to play in there. But I may go back and try and see if I can't put that video next to it. But if not, I will definitely play it for folks when I do kind of a recap of it when I'm go through the book of Jude, which was my presentation was in. And then they've asked about what was the other question? Oh, I will go through on a Monday. So like next Monday, I'll go through one of my presentations, and then that following Monday, I'll go through the next one. But well, I take that back. I'm gonna have to wait until at least the 26th of October when I get my internet upgraded, because then I'm gonna have to go to another third-party streaming platform to be able to run slides and stuff and do that. But get on with Amir Sarfati's Telegram if you're not on there yet. Tyler, I know, did a video a couple of days ago, Sunday, I think, on this conflict. If you haven't watched it, Generation 2434. Brother Chooch did a video yesterday or last night, if I'm not mistaken. And then just throughout the rest of the Watchman community, you've got folks talking about it through various media platforms. Bill Koenig, Bill Salas, obviously Amir Sarfati, Barry Stagner, Jan Markell, Tom Hughes, and those are all, this is what people are focused on right now. Andy Woods has a good one out. I don't know. I don't have any interviews lined up as of yet, so I don't necessarily plan on doing anything with anybody right at this moment. I did make some good friend or good networking friends at the conference. So in the future, I do plan on um, providing some articles from a young man. He's young. I think he's a little bit younger than me, but he was a pilot, worked for UPS and all that for a long time. John Salem or Solom. I'm going to be running some articles from him. I do plan on doing some projects in the future with Jeff Christian from Two Pros, JB Hickson from Not by Works Ministry. Um, yeah, and there was somebody else too. I'm blanking on who it was. But anyways, there's some folks that I reconnected with there, the Prophecy Watchers that I do plan on partnering with going in the future. That we kind of are on the same page on a lot of different things. So it'd be very interesting to get somebody like JB Hickson on and introduce them to this audience. Um, Don Perkins, and so I'm supposed to do something with Pablo, and I cannot remember. I'll have to go back and look at my calendar when I'm getting on with Pablo again. But Pablo's got a new channel. Check him out. And then what else? I think that's it. So thank you guys for being here. You guys are much appreciated. Thank you for all the prayers. I'm telling you, like the the two presentations. This time I wasn't even as nervous as I was last time, and I was in a speaking to a much smaller group last time. This time was way like 3 times the amount of people, and I just had a sense of calmness, there. Um, so there was a word. If you watch my vanishing point video, I get stuck on this word evangelicalism or something like that, and I just could not get that word out. So, anyways, but it was a good time, and thank you to everybody that showed up that I got to meet while I was there. I had so many people come up to me and just say, "Hey, we watch you all the time. We don't get on the live chats or nothing, but we watch you and we watch all your stuff." And I had my 2 kids there with 2 of my kids were with me, and we're walking and down the hall, the main hall, and we're getting stopped every few minutes. People are talking to us, and we get kind of out of that area into heading toward the escalator or the elevators, and my son's like, "Man, you're famous." I was like, "No, I am not famous." But anyways, it was cool meeting everybody there. Got to hang out with Tom a little bit. Got to hang out with Lee Brainerd a little bit. Got to just connect with some folks that I hadn't in a while. So it was good to see everybody again. Last thing, this is the last thing because I'll keep rambling. Still planning on Australia in February. There is a little bit of a hesitation on the part of some of us, myself included, given all the problems that Tom Hughes and these guys had coming out of Europe, based on a lot of the medical protocols and stuff that are starting to kind of come back into vogue. Um, that may throw a wrench into some of this. So more to follow on that. I guess we got to make a decision here pretty soon, and I'm gonna have to buy a ticket to. I don't even know how much tickets cost now. They're to Australia. They used to be. I've been to Australia twice, but the last time I went was 2007. I don't know. I don't even know what tickets cost nowadays. But anyways, I'm gonna have to make a decision on that here pretty soon. And then Tina says, I need to figure out Discord. I've been missing out on the conversations Pete's had on that platform. Well, Tina, I have not had any since I came back from Kentucky, so you're not missing too much right now. I want to get my Discord stuff back up and running, the live stream stuff, but let me get my internet up to speed first because my internet here will not handle having a bunch of different people on video streaming. And then secondly, it will be during the day when my kids are at school. So the nighttime stuff for me has largely been kind of, I may be able to do night stuff every once in a while, but for the most part, my stuff's now going to be during the day simply because of the the needs of the family and stuff. So um, thank you guys. I've had a lot of people also ask me to come speak at their churches and stuff. You know, I'm a one man band here, so um, I get a little bit of help from time to time. Like Jeff Christian, I want to thank him for making the intro trailer for this channel. I'm going to be using that now. But you know, basically, I'm kind of doing all this, you know, to as one guy. So I'm doing it as fast as I can, as best as I can. I do get some good material from other writers like Randy Nettles and Scott Savell and others. And then I do get some good material from Wayne Long, who also got to meet there, who does all the charts and the stuff that puts all the data together that I have on my website. Um, but for the most part, it's me trying to figure all this stuff out. So bear with me. It's moving a little slower than I anticipated, but I want to thank everybody for hanging out with me and for kind of keeping up with us and just keep looking up, you know, because things are only going to continue to intensify. And you know, if we're in the birth pains, right, things are only going to get it's going to get harder and faster, harder, faster, harder, faster until our deliverance, which is the rapture. So thank you guys. Love you all. Mom, I love you. Sorry I didn't get to call you back the other day. Like I said, I got overcome by events yesterday. I'll call you here after this. And then thank you. We'll see you again. See you again at a minimum next week. So take care.